Good afternoon. As the slide quite rightly says there, I'm Director of Marketing for the iomart Group. It's good in some ways and it's bad in others. The good thing is I colour in for a living, so I'm not technical, so I tend to have a bit more of an umbrella view here. I haven't got a slide which I've obviously missed a trick here. Probably not good from a marketing point of view, telling you what we do and everything, because what I wanted to do is actually just go through a few bullet points. It's not a big presentation. In fact, I'll try and cut down from the half hour I wanted to get us back on track as well. And talk about what some of our customers are actually doing with virtualization. So it gives you some reference points. Basically, in a nutshell, though, the group, this is all you need to know about. We actually own 5 data centres across the UK, 1 in Scotland and 4 down south. All networked, all interlinked, etc. And we've been offering cloud services really for about 3 years now. So we're one of the first into it from a DC point of view. For those of you that use organisations like TeleCity, etc., we don't have that model at all. We're not into space and accommodation and just renting out rooms, etc. We actually have our data centres for our own customers. We're a managed hosting outfit. So we're about 30% full across the estate of 5. We can add another £80 million worth of business without any problems at all, without having to increase the data centre estate. So a very different type of model to accommodation and sort of facility space. So, kicking off, the great thing about having Jonathan and Ian going prior to me is that I can cut a lot of stuff out of these slides, otherwise it'll just be repetitive. So I'll fly through it and stop where I think there's a relevant piece. But obviously, backdrop, benefits, issues, examples, and what are we actually hearing from our customers that are using virtualization and similar technologies. So, very quick refresh. What are we faced with? Getting bigger, thirstier each year, widespread adoption, freedom to run, bigger and more powerful kit. We're consuming more power. We've got underutilization. We've got additional power-hungry extras. We've got power inefficiency. We're starting an environmental backlash and punitive taxation and rising energy costs. So that sets the scene. I think it's fair to say we picked most of that up from this morning. Except what I'm talking about was the car industry 30 years ago. Where we've got to with IT now is basically what the car manufacturers were faced with 30 years ago. Oil prices, bigger cars, adding things like air conditioning, etc., etc. 2 miles a gallon type cars, motorways became pretty decent on some of them. So we were going further and further. All of the things that we're facing today as IT virtualization type issues are not new to some industries. What we've got to try and do is try and meet what they've done over the last sort of 30 years. So, demand for service space, we're seeing an increase generally in the business of about 11% per year. So even though we're talking at the moment about virtualization type technologies, we're actually seeing the number of servers increasing at a roughly 11% per year. It's fair to say, a bit of unscientific evidence, but it's fair to say that for every megawatt we use to run our servers, we're also using a megawatt to cool and power. Mentioned several times this morning, server utilization is between 7 and 15%. Over a 24-hour period, you are actually only using a standard server for 7 to 15% of the time. 90% of SMEs that have been surveyed are seeing virtualization as something that they want to get involved with, certainly by 2011. And in fact, when we talk about cloud and we talk about virtualization, there's always, we talk about G-Cloud, government cloud, and what Obama's been doing in the States, and now we're sort of mirroring it over here. We always tend to look at the large corporate players, the large dominant players in the public sector, etc. Where actually we're seeing the majority of the adoption being taken up in the smaller SME market. This is an interesting one. If anybody saw Zuckerberg last week, Facebook. I think this is a personal view, I think the big thing that is going to drive cloud and virtualization is going to be storage. To be perfectly frank, we're now estimated to, by 2020, produce 40 times the level of data that we currently produce now. And if you think about that, you think, well, I can't believe that, can't really be true. Even Facebook reckon that for every page that somebody has as their Facebook page this year, they will need double the size next year, which is why they're going out and building X number of data centers as we speak. So data growth is going to be our industry's sort of Achilles heel. And that's what I think is going to drive cloud initially. What are we going to do with all the terabytes of data that we're storing, et cetera, et cetera. And then of course we've got carbon taxation and legislation. The CRC, which should have been introduced this year, was going to be punitive for some, it was going to be good for others. It kind of got scrapped because it wasn't exactly the best thought through mechanism ever, but it will come back. There is no two ways about it. And we might as well be honest with it. You know, the last version is all about league tables and you got some money back and you could be, you know, PR guru if you said, I've reduced my blah 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 electricity by this and my carbon, etc. They're just going to make it straight tax. End of story. And it's kicked off in Australia this week. We're going to follow probably next April if they get it directed. It is going to be quite punitive, so it tends to get FD's interest when they're faced with £100,000 bills and things they've got no control over. So, other elements, obviously we've heard this morning, traditional network is now totally dispersed. No two ways about that. In a recent survey by Frost & Sullivan, that once again in the SME market, they identified mobile phones as going to be the primary endpoints used for business comms over the next few years. 34% saying voice virtualization will take on the greatest level of importance, which I think backs up everything that Ian and Jonathan were saying this morning. And we are, I believe, going to see the mobile rise in the bring your own device strategy coming in. Now, some people shake their heads and say, oh, that's like Star Warsy type thing, that won't happen. We're talking to 3 educational authorities that are already looking at allowing their students to bring in whatever device they want to connect, because they've realised that providing the school classroom laptop is actually half as good as the iPads that all the kids seem to own. So they're actually looking at allowing the kids to bring in their own devices, and yeah, absolutely. So we will see that, and I think we're seeing the demise of what I call the server hugger. So we have tree huggers, I call server huggers, where the IT department has had this sort of mystical, magical sort of power over the last few years. Nobody actually knows what goes on in it, but you know if you don't get on the right side of it, you're doomed in any other part of the business. We are now seeing, so about 10 years ago, if you mentioned to what I call the traditional server hugger, the thought about outsourcing or using cloud-type technologies, it would have been not a new nelly, it would be a complete disaster, it would never work. We're actually now becoming embraced as a friend, you know, particularly in things like storage and stuff. You know, let's get rid of all that sort of stuff so I can concentrate on core applications. So we are seeing the gradual breakdown of the resistance that we've traditionally seen with outsourcing. Just stick this in, I'm allowed one marketing-y type slide, I reckon, every time I present. Just to show you, virtualization, cloud computing, they are going to become one and the same. It's people like myself which have absolutely done nothing for the world at all. There are so many definitions of cloud computing out there. Basically anybody that has any form of service that is even related to the internet in any way is now a cloud provider of some description. But I usually use, this is the Google global searches for these 2 terms, virtualization and cloud computing. As you can see, between 2004 and halfway through 2007, absolutely nothing on Google for cloud computing. Now, it's rising up. Virtualization, which kind of started its life sort of early, sort of at the beginning of the decade, is kind of about to plateau here, and we'll now see a drop. And I expect to see virtualization sort of ending up down here in the not too distant future as the cloud takes over everything. But what it does mean is that, you know, there is a market awareness of the types of services and products that the cloud and virtualization offer. Very quick, just a recap from this morning. The benefits, as we're seeing them, share physical resources, multiple machines, multiple operating systems, reduce IT costs, business continuity, disaster recovery solutions, increase operational efficiency. And my key one really is it's not the be all and end all. It's not a tool, if you like, it's a toolbox virtualization. You can use it for a whole range of activities. And I'll come on to the benefits in a second. But it's not perfect either. Don't ever let a company like myself tell you go this way because it will solve every issue you've got. There are issues with virtualization. Performance, response times and latency. particularly on the latency thing. We're talking about voice. We're about there now, I think it's fair to say. But a couple of years ago, one of the barriers to taking voice virtualization was latency. Security requirements. You will find people saying, hang on a minute, I don't mind being on my undedicated VM type boxes, but I don't actually want to be on a shared one. I've got particular customer applications, data, I must keep them separate. And I'll come on to how you can overcome these in a moment. Expertise. It's not the easiest thing in the world just to create a virtualized environment, particularly if you're being asked to create a virtualized environment that can cope with Hyper-V, can cope with VMware, can cope with Citrix Zen. We're actually asking our IT departments now to be far more software development led than we are sort of spanners, cables, plugs, bolts. It's not easy. Vendor, in fact, one of the barriers to actually taking a virtualized platform is when it comes right down to the signing of the signature on the contract, is the fear factor, will anything ever work again? And that's something that the risk mitigation has to really, really work on. Vendor support. I know vendors, there are some vendors in the room here, and I know they probably won't like me saying this, but I'm totally agnostic vendor-wise. We run data centers and we manage hosting for large and small clients, and we do whatever they ask us to, basically. But we're reliant on a lot of different vendors. There are a lot of softwares out at the moment, software and application technologies that might work brilliantly on Zen, but aren't so good on VMware, or aren't so good on Hyper-V, etc. And I have to be honest, a lot of the suppliers don't know the answers yet, because we're discovering new applications and new services, etc., where they haven't actually tested that particular scenario in a test environment. So it's a bit like the old broadband days of 10 years ago, when BT was using its suppliers actually as its guinea pigs and feeding back all the information so that the product line could work on it. We are here with a lot of our vendors at the moment. Financial. This is an interesting one. This is an internal type thing, but it is a barrier. Suddenly, different departments saying, "Oh, I don't want I'm happy with my kit there. I've paid for it. It works perfectly. I don't want you coming along and messing around with it for me." So we quite often see interdepartmental fighting, turf wars, etc. So they're the issues that we've seen certainly with people moving to virtualization. But not particularly scientific, but this does show you true sort of a real benefit. If somebody said to you, we talk about the benefits of cost reduction, etc. This is, if we take a pizza box type rack of 20 servers plus a switch, so it's the old pizza box servers, nothing special, etc. They will draw on average about 8.1 amps per rack, which equates to about 0.4 amps per server. If we look at the rather ridiculously cheap rate of 18 pence per kilowatt hour, that equates to about £12.9 per server per month of pure power just to power that rack. If we assume the 7%, 85%, 85 pence of that is actually used on processing and applications, etc. So you're basically paying £11.24 per server per month just for keeping it powered and turned on. And obviously you've got to add in all your cooling costs, so you double that, etc. If you had 20 servers in that rack, you're basically 2,700 quid of just paying power for no reason whatsoever. When you factor in all of the other elements then, as I say, like the cooling, etc., you might have mirroring, you might have that rack mirrored in another data center completely, you start to see where your costs build up. So that's, if nothing else, this is a very, very, very powerful, very simple level I must add, but a very powerful way of explaining why virtualization does really have the benefit to address costs. Now, just some very, very quick tips on if you are looking at virtualization or you haven't gone there or you're looking at cloud, etc. First thing to do, I recommend, is audit your IT estate right down to the nth degree. Virtualization or cloud technology can only derive cost benefits if you're going to make it more efficient for your business. There is no point in having 400 servers of rubbish migrated onto a virtualized or a cloud platform. You might have reduced your costs because you might have reduced the number of servers, but you've still got 400 servers worth of rubbish that you've migrated. So audit. We tend to do, just as Ian was saying earlier about, Jonathan was saying earlier about coming in and sitting down with a client and going through end to end. You've got to be honest. You've got to be honest with yourselves. 9 times out of 10, We will go in, sit down with clients and do sort of an audit with them. We'll sit down, we'll look at every box they've got, and 9 times out of 10 they'll say, I have not got a clue, to be honest, what that rack does. But I do know that if I unplug it, the whole world will end. And you'll go in and you'll find they've got websites running on there that marketing set up 20 years ago, and they're still running. They're totally useless. And then if we're really honest with the IT department, that's where the World of Warcraft boxes are. Or the email servers that don't go through the company. But you've got to be honest, because there is no point in moving stuff like that onto a virtual cloud platform. You won't derive the benefits. Business processes. Very, very interesting. You know, we talk about cloud as if it's just out there. We just plug in and it's wherever we want the cloud to be. It's not. It physically resides in somebody's data centers. Might not be yours, but they physically reside somewhere. So, you know, we talk about business recovery, we talk about disaster recovery, etc., etc. If your entire cloud infrastructure is in the same data center, you've automatically got risk. Data centers do fall over. One fell over very recently in the Docklands last week. People were down for a long time, about 8 hours of outage. If you want true resilience, you need at least 2 separate data centers for your cloud. But it might well be that your applications don't actually need to be that. We were saying earlier about the sort of the red, the green and the amber alerts. You know, do you want YouTube to take preference on your bandwidth over Salesforce, etc.? You need to think before any of this what the business processes are. If we take something like Comic Relief, for example, they cannot afford to be off on the 31st or the 13th of March, or whenever Comic Relief is, for longer than a nanosecond, because they're taking £2,500 a second via the website. So being down for 8 hours is absolutely of no use to them whatsoever, because that's their one hit per year. So when you come to doing your business processes, and you're talking about data backup, and you're talking about what you need to move, you've got to really sit down and plan this. And I've put this in here, don't be afraid to delete. There is an absolutely ridiculous thought process at the moment, going back to our data and our storage, etc., where you cannot delete anything. And everybody goes, don't worry, storage is really cheap. It's only a few pence per terabyte. We have a particular customer, I won't name them, 150 branch offices. They store every piece of email. You think, nothing wrong with that. They store all the spam. They store all the internal emails, sending, you know, the latest YouTube funny around. And it's just building up and up and up. Why store spam? Why not have archiving? Why not archive what you need and delete everything? And that comes right down to the guys, the end users of your equipment. You've got to make sure all those processes are in place as well, otherwise you're just going to do this with your IT infrastructure. Power management, P&L responsibility to the CIO, CTO, very, very key, very key. Now, we worked with, with DEC quite recently, about 2 years ago, on a big survey. We managed to survey 3,500 CTOs and CIOs. Only 5% of them had responsibility for their power bill. And the rest, it was a traditional office facility type cost that was divided up per square footage or whatever facilities people's do. And yet, when you actually got into it, the IT department was usually responsible for about 60 to 70% of the total business's power. If you give the responsibility to the people that are using it, they can then manage it, they can reduce it, they can look at ways of doing it. So that's quite a key one. Treat data centers and your IT estate as a standalone business from a P&L point of view. If you do that, you'll soon see where you can derive cost benefits, where you can derive savings, and where you can increase efficiency. Projections and plan, determine future business use. Very, very key. I mean, we've said, you know, this business changes literally while we've been in here. Another 5 apps will be released, etc., etc. What are the business model going to be in a year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time, 4 years' time? Will it be totally mobile? Will it be data-driven, etc., etc.? And plan for it now. And outsource consultancy. Don't be afraid to buy in expertise. There's no point in saying that, you know, we can do this, it's easy. If there are areas where you think you can get expertise in, buy it in. Be my advice. And that was it.